Rich Van Every, and this is Kevin Anthony. And we are going to continue our amazing dialogue and share it with you on discernment. And we're going to cover some of our most pressing news stories filtering through the airwaves.
It was a bit of a slow news week. However, there are some updates to some stories. And when we talk about those things, we're going to kind of get into the levels of discernment around them. So this episode might be a little bit less about the story itself, a little bit more about how we can create a framework to help us interpret those stories.
I like that. Yeah, because, this is really a journey we're all on together, and individually, everybody's waking up in their own way, in their own time, and it's a lot to choke down the red pill. So I still lean on Kevin sometimes. I got to call him at night and say, hey, buddy, I'm having an end of the world meltdown.
Yeah, I've had to talk you off the ledge quite a few times.
But, the sun continues to rise and we are blessed with another day. So, gratitude is the attitude.
And, this is a great moment to talk about the difference between, say, somebody who's just waking up to these things that are happening and somebody that's seen them for a long time. And the difference is this. I've been following this stuff for over 20 years. And not that I knew it all right from the start. It's been a learning process. I've learned more and more as the years go on. However, I've seen a lot of things happen over those years that were supposed to be the end of the country, the end of the world, the end of everything, right? And it's not. We're still here.
Right.
And so you can call me skeptical, you can call me jaded. I would say I'm just more careful now because I've watched so many things that were going to supposedly be the end of us.
Yeah.
That's it, we're done. There's nothing after this, right?
Right.
And yet here we still are. And so the discussion is really around looking at information and doing your best to discern, okay, not only what is true and what is not true, what is propaganda and what is fact, but also what does that really mean down the road, right? Because it might mean something immediate that we should prepare for.
Yeah.
And it might mean something that's 20, 30 years or 40 years down the road. Doesn't mean that's not important to know, but it may mean that it's not an immediate problem that we need to solve right now, where we need to get hysterical and change our entire lives and move out into the middle of nowhere and live off the land. Like, okay, there might be a time for that, and that time might not be now.
Yeah. That is one of the things that keeps me feeling hopeful and positive, that we do live in still the country that has the most rights and freedoms in the world, and that we've made it this far. So we're going to continue on our journey here and know that fear is their weapon of large part to shut down our rational thinking and to, in a sense, get us to believe that the government is the new God.
There's only one reason why we still enjoy a few more freedoms than most of the rest of the world. There's only one. Where, can you see it here?
Yeah.
That's the reason.
Yeah, which, is a contentious issue that I think we should get into on another episode, because I was confused about ownership and gun rights for a long time. I never really quite understood how it was such a massive difference, and especially after other countries have seemingly given up their rights, they are left in a more vulnerable position.
I think we're going to have an entire show on that, because
Yeah.
that's going to take a while. So what's our first story today?
So we're going to talk about Mr. Puppet Master Biden and his visit to Ukraine, and what an incredible just display of staged propaganda that was.
Indeed. So let's first talk about the fact that we have, and this is going to be another story that we're going to cover in this episode, but let's talk about the fact that there is a major environmental disaster happening in Ohio right now. Probably one of the biggest environmental disasters that we've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And instead of going there to help out, to address that, to reassure the people that live there, to provide money and resources to help with that situation, instead, our president decides to fly over to Ukraine and hand over a few more $1 billion and stage an absolutely pathetic shot that is attempting to make him look strong. Now, all right, let's first talk about why we know for sure it was staged. So there have been multiple former United States Secret Service people who've come out and talked about this. And even if they didn't, before any of those people came out to say anything, I already knew this because I understand, at a basic level, how the Secret Service functions. Mm-hmm. The Secret Service, when they are protecting the president, has one job and one job only, and that is to make sure that that man stays alive at all costs. Mm-hmm. At all costs. They take zero risks. Any even minute threat that they don't even think is really a threat, and he will be out of there so fast. Mm-hmm. So here's what would have happened in reality compared to what actually did happen. If they did take the president into an active war zone, which does happen. Multiple presidents before Biden have gone to active war zones. Of course, they don't take them into the war zone where there's actual fighting. It's always somewhere near, right, out around. But they have taken presidents to active war zones. However, if, say, something like an air raid siren went off, he would have immediately been surrounded by Secret Service who would have picked him up, literally, because he can't move very fast. Mm-hmm. They would have picked him up and immediately shuffled him into the nearest bunker. Now, you might be saying, well, maybe they didn't have a bunker. Yes, they did, mm-hmm, because this is all pre-planned ahead of time. They do not take the president anywhere without knowing exactly where they have defensible space, exactly where they can move this guy in a fraction of a second if anything goes down. Every former Secret Service agent who has spoken on this topic has said the same thing. There is no way, literally no way, that the U.S. Secret Service stood there, let this air raid siren go off, and did nothing about it. Unless they were told not to do anything about it because they were told that it wasn't real. See, here's the thing. Even if they were told to stand down, the Secret Service agents I've heard speak on this say they wouldn't have stood down. Right. They still would have grabbed the president and they would have taken him into the nearest shelter. Yeah. So if they didn't do that, then they obviously knew that this wasn't a real threat. So I find it no coincidence at all that after the whole Chinese spy balloon incident, where President Biden looked like a completely pathetic weakling of a president who did nothing to defend his own country over his own homeland, that all of a sudden, immediately following, we get 2 or 3, we shot them down immediately before they entered our airspace balloons, and then immediately after that, we get, oh, look at Biden, look how brave he is, in an active war zone, paying no attention to the air raid siren. Yeah. It's all theater, folks. It is theater. Yeah. Literally staged.
And a lot of times to, confirm that you're discerning the situation well, you will find these contradictions or, some of the reporters even in the legacy media was announcing that, we've been here for a week. There have been no air sirens, and all of a sudden it happens on cue as they're walking out. And so they were, and so in one breath you have, some of the reporters or not, who am I thinking of? Anderson Cooper saying, well, wow, what this was really brave for him to do that. And then some of the on the ground reporters are just going like, no, this doesn't really make sense at all. Like it
doesn't make sense when CNN actually points that out, right? Yeah. Because CNN, and I'm not just pointing them out, I mean, they are terrible. There's nothing worth watching on CNN at all. But that goes for all the other major news networks as well. But if CNN is actually saying, hey, this is kind of weird because there's been no air sirens all week, and then suddenly the second Joe Biden steps outside of the car, there's air raid sirens. Yeah. Like they knew what was going on.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So one thing to know, if you don't already, is this Zelensky character was an actor, and quite a just extravagant one at that. And he has, done such a good job to play like the victim bad guy now, and the fact that they had images of them walking together with angels or religious backgrounds, knowing that he has been completely limiting people's right for religion in that country, putting priests and nuns in jail. It's just really like, it was such a...
My favorite staged photo from that event was they took this photo of Biden standing there in his long trench coat and Zelensky standing there next to him like this. He's always posing like this, trying to look like the big tough military guy. But they took the photo. So as a photographer, you'll get this. They took the photo from down low, staring up at them to make them look super tall, and they're both standing in these poses, And it's such a joke because if you saw the video where they're walking to that point, Joe Biden can barely walk across that courtyard. Like, he's so at this point physically incapable, and yet in the picture he looks like he's like Superman, Yeah. It's all staged. It's all a joke.
Well, so moving on, let's talk about the next story, shall we?
Oh, you mean the place where Biden should have been, rather than giving away more of our hard taxpayer dollar?
You would imagine, or even Pete Buttigieg, our transportation secretary, who is a complete joke and has seemingly done everything he can to seem incompetent and ignorant to the fact of the magnitude of this natural disaster and how it's polluting water downstream for millions of people in America, not to say what it's doing to the air, to the soil. I mean, this is really something that is hard to wrap your head around.
Mayor Pete didn't have to work real hard at looking incompetent. He's looked incompetent from day
one.
He
actually tried. He actually tried at this one. Didn't show up for 3 weeks.
Okay, so by now, of course, you've all heard the story about the train derailment in Ohio that had highly toxic dioxin chemicals on it. Vinyl chloride, which is apparently considered a dioxin, which apparently we've known about has been one of the most toxic chemicals in existence on planet Earth. This is not something we just found out now. We've known about it for a long time. We also apparently knew that if we were to burn it, that we would send all of these dioxins up into the atmosphere where they would rain down on literally everything. Not only would they fill the air, but they would rain down over all the farmland, over everybody's homes and everything else. And so the question really is, why? Why did the government choose to put it in a big pool and insufficiently burn it? Now, some experts have said burning is okay only if you burn it properly. You have to 100% burn it, not just throw it in a big pit and light it on fire, because you get only partial combustion. So one of the experts that I listened to said, hey, if you see a giant plume of black smoke, that means you got a lot of carbon, which means you have incomplete combustion, which means you're just basically sending all of those chemicals up into the air. Now, there are a lot of potential theories as to why they may have done that. I can't say that any of them are true or valid, but I do find it rather curious that one of the largest concentrations of privately owned farmland happens to be downwind of this ecological disaster, which means that land is likely going to be polluted with dioxins for the rest of eternity. Well, at least, the rest of humans' life here, because it's apparently extremely difficult to remove that from the environment. And the safe exposure levels for dioxins, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's somewhere in the range of like 0.0001.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like the tiniest amount is highly toxic. So what do? And you really have to wonder, why would government make that decision, knowing the seriousness of this particular chemical and knowing what is around that crash site? Sometimes people say, well, they didn't know. Yeah, they knew.
Yeah.
Well, government's incompetent. Yes, they are incompetent in many ways, but it's hard to say that that's really what's going on. I can't say for sure that it was intentionally done as a sinister act, but I can say that the likelihood of that being the truth is higher than not.
Yeah. There's so many variables and so many potential motives or outcomes that were going to be achieved by this disaster happening that are yet to be known. And I certainly believe, though, it was an orchestrated crisis. There was, former railroad employees warning of these practices. Apparently the train was going in very excessive speed. Generally, they bring the trains down to a slow speed when they're carrying toxic chemicals through a populated area. This train was apparently going 200 miles an hour. I don't even know if that's possible.
No, I don't think so.
No, it was going. It was potentially going fast. The tracks are not the greatest.
I've seen the security. There's some security cameras that were along the train route, and it was moving probably faster than it should have been, but nowhere near 200 miles an hour.
And it was potentially on fire far before it even got there.
The axle, yeah. But so this brings up an interesting point that. There have been multiple train accidents that were the result of sabotage prior to this. Mm-hmm. So once you start digging into some of these older stories, and you can go back and start researching, train derailments, there's been quite a few of them, and many of them have been due to direct sabotage of the train tracks. Apparently there's some sort of wire or something they can put across the tracks that will cause this exact thing. There's also the potential for, sabotaging the train cars themselves. In this case, they're saying that it was an overheated axle that failed and caused the derailment. But then the question is, okay, why did it overheat and fail? We don't know. They want us to believe that the train company just, doesn't care and doesn't do maintenance on their trains, and, that's what happened. Possible. I'm not saying that train company are the good guys, because they're not. They're not. Right. But also most of the arguments that I've heard, so they're proposing new legislation to try to solve this problem. One of the things is they said that, well, this happened because Trump ended some legislation during his presidency that would have prevented this. No, it wouldn't have, because that legislation didn't actually pertain to this train or this incident at all. There's another one about, well, so the way that we need to do this is we need to pass a law to make sure they have at least 2 humans on this train, because all these trains now have 1 or sometimes none, and that was the problem. A human could have caught it. This train apparently had 3 humans on it, right? So every one of those things that they're telling you is very easily debunked when you look at the facts. And so, the legislation wouldn't have impacted it. They had enough humans on the train. So then you start going, well, how did this happen then?
Right.
We don't know, but given if you take this event and you put it in light of all of the other things that have been going on in this country, such as the food factory fires, the hundreds of food factory fires,
right,
the power substation attacks where people have been literally shooting out power substations, just happened here in California. When you look at it in the context of all those other things going on, it's not hard to imagine that this may have been another sabotage.
Yeah.
Right? There's very clearly something happening within the country where key parts of our infrastructure are being taken out.
Even in Mexico, Pemex had multiple refineries go up in flames this last week. And I think, bringing up the policy-related issue of, what the government's attempting to do is really federalize the railroad system along with everything else.
Because the federal government does such a good job of running everything else.
And this is really, I think, a part of the socialism movement to give up and have even the corporations that are already beholden to the government perhaps completely, fully regulated, fully captured, fully controlled, in which then, they can...
This is a great time to talk about Milton Friedman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how much you know about Milton Friedman.
Not much. Okay. Enlighten me.
Well, Milton Friedman was an economics teacher, but he also wrote a bunch of books on it. But he talked about the reason why government is so bad at administering any service. And I don't need to go into the whole thing. I'll boil it down. But basically, he says you have money, and then you have who you're spending the money on. And he breaks it down into 4 categories, right? So you can spend your money on yourself. You can spend your money on somebody else. You can spend somebody else's money on yourself, or you can spend somebody else's money on somebody else, right? And basically it goes like this. If you're spending your own money on yourself, you are very careful about how much you spend and what you spend it on. right? Because you want to make sure that you get the best thing for the dollar that you can possibly get,
Right.
because it's your hard-earned money. Well, then let's say you spend your money on somebody else. So you're going to give them a gift. You're still careful about how much you spend because it's your hard-earned money, but you pay less attention to the quality of the thing that you buy because it's not for you, right? Well, then, okay, you could spend somebody else's money on yourself. So now you don't care about how much you spend, but you are still careful about what you're getting for that dollar. The last one of the four is where government comes in, and that is spending somebody else's money on somebody else. And when you do that, when it's not your money and you are not the benefit of what that money is being spent on, you have zero incentive to make sure that it's spent efficiently and that there's quality returned for what you spend. And this is the problem with government. It has no incentive whatsoever to do a good job because it's taking money that does not belong to them. The government doesn't make any money. They don't earn money. They don't create anything. They don't produce anything. They take money from some people and they give it to other people. And because it's not their money and they're not the ones receiving it, they have zero incentive to do a good job. And this is why they are so inefficient at what they do.
Yeah, well, wow, lots to digest there. Thank you
Milton
for that, Kevin.
Friedman.
Yeah.
Go look him up.
Incredible. All right, moving on. We're going to now talk about the WHO treaty that is apparently being potentially signed this week from our puppet president. And a lot of people have been a little concerned that we're going to lose our sovereignty due to this treaty and that they can really use their emergency pandemic powers and really bring the hammer down on not only the healthcare system, but all of our laws and rights to move about freely and make choices for ourselves in this country. So,
there's a lot to say about this one.
Yeah.
The first one is this is not the first time this has been tried. They actually tried to do this under the Trump administration as well. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to put a treaty in place, and not just in the U.S., but in all countries.
Right.
They're trying to get all the countries to sign on board to this treaty that says that in the event of a pandemic, the World Health Organization gets to call the shots and tell every country how they're going to handle it. Now, if you were paying attention at all between 2020 and 2023, you would know that every single recommendation that the World Health Organization made in regards to the COVID pandemic was wrong. Documented, scientifically verified to be the wrong approach and the wrong policy. Now, you might say, well, okay, this was unprecedented. We weren't aware. We've never tried these things before. And so, yeah, they got a few things wrong. You would be wrong because we were aware. We have tried these policies before. We knew exactly what would happen when they were implemented, but they did it anyway because, well, solving the pandemic was never really their goal. And, you also have to keep in mind as well, this is the problem with anything that's called quote unquote emergency powers, right? If you tell the government, if X situation happens, we will then give you Y powers. The government will always find a way to create X situation so that they can get Y powers. This has happened countless times throughout history, and it will continue to happen. So let me put it to you this way. If all of the countries of the world gave the World Health Organization the powers in a pandemic to basically usurp local government, countries' governments, and tell them how to operate, then the World Health Organization, you can for sure 100% bet will create another pandemic so that they can then have that power and that control. You can never tie those two things together. You basically have to tell the government, sorry, you don't have that power, and we'll figure it out as we go along. Because otherwise, they will simply create the situation that gives them that power. They've done it so many times throughout history. How many times does it take before we learn that lesson, right?
Yeah.
Now, just looking at COVID, we know that there was no actual pandemic. I'm not saying that COVID didn't exist. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole in this episode. I'm simply telling you that what we experienced did not meet the actual criteria of a pandemic. We got the criteria of pandemic through statistical manipulation, right? So what's to stop them from doing it again? Just because, hey, we said if a global pandemic happens, we're going to give you this power. They'll say, great, we'll just create one. And all we have to do is statistically manipulate the numbers. And now we've got another pandemic. And now we've just overtaken your entire government and your sovereignty. Now, Trump was not having that. So he absolutely did not sign it. And furthermore, he removed us from the World Health Organization. Now, a lot of people went berserk over that. Like, oh my God, what is he doing? He's going to kill us all. He's taking us out of the World Health Organization. Those were the people that have never taken any time to actually study the history of the World Health Organization, how it came to be, who runs it, who funds it, and what their past performance has been. Because if you have done any of those things, you would know that not only is it not out for our best interest, it has an abysmal track record. I mean, absolutely abysmal track record. So, do you want to give that corrupt, horrible organization all of your money and power over you? Nope, not me.
Yeah. The Paris Accord is another example of that. Just it sounds like, I've been a big nature environmental person, but yeah, no, it doesn't have anything to do with that. So the important thing to realize here is that instead of binge watching a Netflix series, consider digging into some of these rabbit holes, take your time, tiptoe in, do whatever you need to do, but confront the opportunity to get yourself educated and practice discernment, have the conversations with your friends and family, and really understand that we are all in this together, and that's the only way we're going to potentially get out, make it through, resist, hold off these tyrannical, draconian agendas on our lives.
Yeah, and what we're really trying to do on this show is present stories in a way that gets you to think, because what usually happens is you're just told a narrative. Here is what happened. Trust us. We're the experts. We're the authorities. And then later on, almost everything they tell you turns out to be false, but they don't report it on the news. They'll just quietly publish it in page 32 of the newspaper that nobody reads anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So you never really get to hear the other side of that. So what we were really trying to do here in this show is to present these stories and tell you the parts that they're not telling you. And we're not necessarily even always telling you that those parts are the absolute truth. We just want you to understand that there is the possibility that what you're being told isn't the truth or the whole truth, and that there may be other factors at play here that you're not being told.
And one of the best tools I'd say to implement here are just the questions, asking good questions, and really having a dialogue along those lines so people can feel as if they're discovering on their own what is not obvious or what is potentially true. And this is, I think, one of the important, tactics by which we can be loving and kind even in the midst of a asymmetrical information war that we're in now with so much deception and criminal activity taking place.
Absolutely. Ask questions. Ask lots of questions, and ask two questions or good questions is what I meant. And there are two questions in particular that you should always ask. Who has the motive, and who stands to benefit the most? So I don't know if you've ever, been into watching like murder mysteries or mysteries in general, right? What are the two questions they always ask? Who had motive, who had opportunity, right? And who stands to benefit? Okay, so that's three questions. So, but that's what you have to ask yourself. Mm-hmm. For instance, when we covered the story on the Nord Stream pipeline, originally when that story broke, everybody said, Russia did it. Well, if you're a critical thinker, you're going, Russia? Okay, Russia had opportunity because it's their pipeline, but they had no decent motive whatsoever to do it.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah. And all of us said, this doesn't make any sense. Just using basic logic, it makes no sense that Russia would do it, especially when we could literally look at several other major players and go, they all had motive and opportunity both, and they stood to benefit the most from it. I mean, it's generally not that complicated. So ask yourself those questions every time. Of course, the other one is follow the money.
Right.
So that is who stands to benefit the most.
Yeah.
It's that question. Yeah. But if you can follow who stands to get the most money and the most control, because everything that you're witnessing in the world right now comes down to two things: money and control. Right? That's what everybody's after. They're after making as much money for themselves and controlling as much resources as possible. And it doesn't matter what that resource is. It doesn't matter if it's land, for a country. It doesn't matter if it's military resources.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it's monetary resources. Women are even considered a resource. I'm sorry, I hate to say that, but it's kind of true.
Yeah.
With all the trafficking and all that, right? So it's all about controlling the money and the resources. If you figure out who stands to benefit the most in those areas, and you will likely find out who's behind it.
Yeah. So this is the opportunity and the challenge. It's really a spiritual growth process for me. That's one of the ways I can find a higher perspective on this, because it is uncomfortable. It is challenging at times. It is confusing. But, if you take the right attitude and you really are fascinated that you're watching this movie play out that is far better and more intriguing and mysterious than any show you're going to find on television, for instance, wow, you are going to not only be benefiting yourself ultimately down the road, because we do need to be thinking about, we're still, a lot of people don't think things can happen in America. But anything can happen in America, friends. So
have they been sleeping for the last 3 years?
And it's in this like bite by bite taking away this consolidation of wealth and power that I luckily recognized right in early 2020 of what was really going on. And it is again back to us using cash, voting with our dollar, knowing that we are in this together. And there is no left and right in this debate. It is good versus evil, in my opinion. And, it's really all of our civil duties to be engaged and continue to get educated.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for joining us today. That wraps up another episode of Discernment Now. And any final words, Kevin?
Be discerning. Be discerning. Read everything that you can possibly read. Watch as much as you can watch. And at the same time, sort of in regards to what you were just saying, which is don't allow yourself to go off into despair as a result. Once you can see things for what they really are, it's actually somewhat comical. You'll laugh at a lot of it, even though it's not necessarily like funny because bad things are happening in the world. You'll laugh at it because it's so ridiculous and you will see right through it.
All right. Thanks again. Take care. Stay healthy. Stay free.